This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discussed James Franklin's first Monday press conference of the season, building momentum off of last week's offensive performance, and the sign stealing scandal at Michigan and how it can impact the game this weekend against Penn State. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber of the Center Daily Times. She is Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. We are talking about Michigan week, and I don't want to drag out this intro too long because there is a lot, probably more than we had even anticipated, I don't know, a month ago.
Yeah, all the signs point to this being a really busy week, John.
There it is. Should I
Oh,
start a
you knew it
counter?
was coming. You
How
definitely
many
should.
times?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one.
we dropped the word signs in here. How many
That's two,
times we talk about stealing?
three.
But no, before we get too far into it, don't forget, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Hit the like button down below. Hit the subscribe button down below if you're watching on YouTube. Leave those ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. But yeah, I mentioned we talked to James on Monday. Why did we do that? Because nothing that we say
Why?
matters.
Why
That's
did we, John? What was the point?
because our opinions don't matter. I'm very excited for
Yeah.
this to happen out of a bye week, and then everyone have to cut their bye week vacation short by a day. That'll be a lot of fun.
You
But
know,
that's not now.
that's a future us problem.
Yes.
This I'll tell you what, the thing that messed with me was I'm just used to like Monday's kind of a slower day, and it's like the closest thing we get to an off day during the season. So then Tuesday, right? We're recording this on Tuesday night. So all of Tuesday, like I kept thinking it was Monday, and then it was like we had player Zooms on Tuesday. So I alluded to it
Yeah.
last week. I wouldn't know the days of the week. It's thrown me for a loop. I said to everybody on Monday, "Oh, I'll see you tomorrow at practice." No, practice is Wednesday. So yeah, creatures of
That was
habit,
my
John. We're
thing.
not doing well.
That was my whole issue. The saying see you tomorrow to everyone. There's men's
Mhm.
basketball opened their season last night. Obviously covered that game. And every time I said goodbye to anyone, I said see you tomorrow. And they all said no. And I was like, right. It's like see
We'll
you
see you
Wednesday.
on Zoom tomorrow. That's what we can
Yeah,
go with
right.
now.
Yeah, and it's just it's gonna take a bit for me to adjust. I'm not gonna lie. You mentioned Monday is like an easier day. Like I pre-write all of my stuff on Monday to try and like lessen what
Yeah.
are otherwise busy days like Tuesday through Thursday, especially and when it's away games. Obviously, we're traveling Fridays. But it was so I didn't get a lot of my pre-writing done yesterday, which means I had to do it today. And I just I couldn't get going, right? Like I had a hard time getting going. All that stuff will get done though.
No,
It
I
always
think
does.
it's
But
because I blame this on the Maryland trip and the 3:30 kick, John. That's what did all of this. It was the 3:30
yeah,
kick, messes with the sleep schedule. We've changed the clocks. It's now dark at 5 o'clock. We're
I gotta tell
unraveling
you,
right now.
I really did not I think I might have told you this already yesterday at the presser. I did not like that when I was driving home from Maryland after we recorded that my ETA was 1:45 a.m. and I looked at the clock and it was 1:57 or something like that. And
Yeah.
I was like, what did I hit
What
a
happened?
black hole? Am I in a wormhole right now? Am I okay? And then it hit again. I was a little sleepy at that point, but ended up
It's
being
never
just
good. Never good when you're up to see the clocks change, John. That's
yeah,
never a good sign. Yeah.
well, here's the thing. That's me every time. It's way worse the
True.
other direction, by the way. It's way worse
Yeah.
when it's like 1 o'clock and suddenly it's 3 and you're like, no, no, we're not doing that.
Well, that's
But yeah,
always like I've
I've
always
been messed up.
wondered, and I think one time I saw this in person, but like when you're out at a bar, right on like the clock change day, it's like what happens?
Do they
Um,
close at 1?
I think do they or do they stay? Like if it's the other way, I feel like they stay open maybe for an extra hour. But
Yeah, that's my guess.
I feel like I
You
did
know
that
what?
one time.
For the listener, I will put this to the test. I will gladly go out both times this in
We're
2024
gonna.
and I will find out for you the listener what
hmm
time that bar closes.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna have to do, John, because this is in the name of the listener here.
That's right.
We're here for you all. But yeah, it's been a busy week already. But I will say, John, our week is nothing compared to the folks who cover Michigan.
Yeah.
Whoo, boy, like we've all had weeks where, it's just like your team is the story, and there's so much extra work and extra interest and extra eyeballs that come with that. So I do, and again, these are all journalists like us that are just trying to do the job, cover the game, get their paycheck, and go on with their lives, right? So their week has been absolutely derailed. And then by the end of it, hey, you still have this massive matchup. We'll see the new rankings come out later tonight, Tuesday night. So we will actually see what both of these teams are ranked. But yeah, you're covering a marquee game on top of just a bizarre, like
The
definitely
biggest story in college football.
and the most bizarre. And like this
Yeah.
is a sport where there's a lot of weird shit that happens, and this is just like
All the
next
time.
level. Yeah.
Yeah, my favorite thing that came out today was the Connor Stalions vacuum stuff. I don't know if you've seen this,
Yeah.
that he bought a house
Yeah.
in an HOA and neighbors called and complained because he had a bunch of vacuums on his porch. And apparently his defense was that it was a Michigan State fan that accused him of it to try and disturb his focus.
And there was a
which is
photo included with the story too
the photo is
of
like
all the
some deranged
vacuums.
stuff. Yeah, like
Yeah. That's
nobody should have that many vacuums on the
and
porch.
to me, that's like the other part of this too is like, we always hear about expanded staff sizes and like what do some of these people do, right? And like a lot of it I,
Sell
I don't
vacuums.
know. But yes, but then you add this into it and you're like, Jim Harbaugh, like how, why? Like what like what is Connor Stalions' background besides being a Michigan super fan and obviously have military ties, all these other things. But you're like how weird was that interview? Maybe for Harbaugh it was just like another day at the office. I
I
don't
was going to say
know.
he might have been in his element, I think, at that
Yeah.
point. But no,
Baffling.
we asked James yesterday. Not you and I. Another reporter asked James yesterday about the sign stealing, right? And I believe it
Mhm.
was Mike Gross who asked it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, and then Neil
Uh,
Rudell later on asked about Harbaugh.
yeah, but Mike asked first about like the sign stealing stuff and how it impacts them, and he kind of referred to what he had said in the past about how they adjust stuff anyways. They adjust signs, and they're very aware of that. Essentially, didn't really want to dive into it. Said less is more, and I understand not wanting to do that, right? Like I understand
Mhm.
not wanting to turn yourself into a headline in a story that is
But
already like people are grabbing headlines left and right out of it.
and James Franklin's had that happen to him before this year.
Yes,
So I think he's very aware of that, right? And like the whole we're just trying to go 1-0. But what I wanted to pull up, John, was actually Neil Rudell's questions. Neil asked James if he has any thoughts on the status of Jim Harbaugh, right? Because at some point this week, I think we're probably going to find out what the conference plans to do and kind of what the next steps are with this, right? So this, I got the answer pulled up in front of me. Um, James Franklin says, "I'm
started at the very beginning, the very
okay,
beginning of this
okay,
quote.
all right, yeah." I was gonna. James Franklin starts with, "Your flashlight is still on. Will somebody help him with the flashlight?"
And
Neil
shout out
is.
to you, Audrey, for helping
I,
Neil shut his
I tried to
flashlight
reach
off on
over
his
his
phone.
shoulder for the flashlight. We tried to get the flashlight off, and then James
Rest
goes,
assured,
"No."
we
We
introduced
eventually got
Neil
it off.
to voice memos as well. So this
Yeah,
is
there's a
progress was
lot
made
going
on
on
Monday.
there.
That's right.
James goes, "No, I was going to try to use that. The flashlight didn't work." Franklin goes, "I'm focused on all the stuff I see on film. That's what we're focused on. All the stuff that we see on film, their plays, schemes, all the stuff. When I say see on film, we see on the coach's copy of the film, the stuff going on between the sidelines, the 53 and a third. That's what we're focused on." Wow,
So
oh
I've
wow, is that ever passive aggressive? When
no
he said
see.
that, I took that as passive aggressive. Did you?
I think this might be being misinterpreted a little bit. I think James was realizing that he might have been saying something salacious by like saying what he sees on the coach's film, then tried to clarify it with
Oh
the
no,
53 and a third
no,
because that's
I
the
think it
field,
was
right? The length
intentional.
is I think it might have been intentional at first, and then he tried to backtrack it with the 53 and a third. I don't know. I don't take
Mhm.
a ton from it.
Oh, I
Listen. I'm
found it
sure.
amusing.
I'm
The
sure that
coaches
James
copy.
is not thrilled with Michigan doing this, right?
Oh yeah,
Like I
there's no
can't
way. I
imagine
mean,
any coaches are at this point.
man, what I would pay to be a fly on the wall for some of these conversations between
I
Big
know.
Ten coaches, athletic directors, because it's one of those things where, and I was thinking back to the preseason, right, when Penn State had that open practice, and then it downpoured that delightful night.
Hard to
Um,
forget it.
yeah, one of the monumental nights, first open practice ever here for preseason, and it pours. But I remember going into that, I asked Manny Diaz, I asked Mike Yursich about just the concept of having an open practice because that's unusual. Like that is not something that Penn State does, even though a lot of programs are doing it. And let's be honest, I think Penn State only did it because Ohio State was doing something similar. It was tied in with the collective, right? So that's probably why Penn State did it. So anyway, but I asked Manny Diaz about it. And I was like, all right, well, obviously you've been a head coach before. Like, are you concerned about a setting like this where it is open to the public? And Manny Diaz just deadpanned to me and he goes, espionage, it's real. And I laughed because I was like, okay, like this, like sounds a little extreme, but also like coaches, they're all paranoid, so whatever. But then you fast forward to where we are now, and I'm like, like it makes you think.
Well, and then you had the Schiano interview at halftime of that Michigan game
Mhm.
when he basically said there's some stuff going on that's not okay. I don't remember the exact quote. It's something along those lines. Pretty clearly now intimating that what is allegedly to have happened was happening, right?
And I think to me the interesting thing with this, and I've seen so many takes on this, right? And I don't know what the correct answer is, probably somewhere in the middle. But how much of an actual advantage is it, right? Because certainly there's an advantage to it, but when people want to say, well, that's the only reason why Michigan's winning, I don't buy that, right? Like that's not the only
Yeah.
reason. It certainly helps you, but like I think that's like the competitive balance of that to me is really interesting because, right? How do you quantify? And I know we did a story on the Athletic about it of how do you quantify the sign stealing, right? Like how many wins does that maybe give you, or how many points per game, right? I believe that the answer that we had reported, my colleagues at the Athletic was like, yeah, it's maybe good for like a touchdown a game or whatever. So you do kind of wonder, or at least I wonder about a lot of that stuff. But we do know that Penn State was one of the schools that we all saw. I think the ESPN story about the UMass game.
One of the greatest story quotes from a source that
Hmm.
I've seen. I don't have it exactly in front of me, but essentially saying it was too cold and too rainy. They didn't pay me enough. I wasn't staying. Right. And so he
Yeah,
stayed
I'm
for
not
a
going to
half
stay
of
and film
UMass.
UMass because yeah,
Yeah.
it's just not worth it. But yeah, so a lot of stuff going on at Michigan, and I feel like we will know more definitely before Saturday. Um, this is again, like we said, the most bizarre story in college sports right now. Definitely the most bizarre story in college football. And Penn State then is kind of thrown into it just because of, hey, you're playing Michigan this week. But as you mentioned, John, James Franklin did say coming out of the bye week that they like look at everything they do with their signals
Yeah.
and how they do it. And the other thing too, and I've seen this mentioned quite a bit here in the last couple days, people are saying, well, if we go to helmet communication, that'll just get rid of all of this. Well, James Franklin actually had talked about that day when he had mentioned, um, mixing up their signals coming out of the bye week or whatever it was. And his argument with that was like, well, we're still going to have signals, like, right? And like your defense, you're still going to have signaling. So, like,
Yeah.
it's not going to solve everything. And I do think that's one of the things because this year, bowl season, there is going to be like the wearable technology, right? Like we see in the NFL. They even approved where at bowl games you'll see like the iPads or whatever. I don't know whoever the sponsor is on the sideline. So maybe we'll get a great GIF of Drew Allar throwing a tablet or something this bowl
That
season.
would be a fun time.
Yeah.
But no, I think it is interesting that you bring that up because it dovetails with something that Drew Aller was asked about this morning by Ben Jones and that people have noticed on social media, on message boards, and all of that
Hmm.
about Aller wearing the play sheet wristband, right? With on this is his left hand, right? I'm bad at
Believe
this.
so.
Yeah, I
Believe
believe
so.
it's his left
Yeah.
hand, left wrist, I should say, not left hand.
Yeah.
But
Wears it
it would
right
be
on his
funny if
hand.
he was,
Yeah.
yes. But he's been doing this since the Ohio State game, right? That was the first
Okay.
game this season that happened. Last year, it was the case, we believe, for the last 5 games based on some wonderful research by
Investigative reporting.
that's right. Investigative reporting with the help of Daniel Gallen of the Lions 24/7 too. And we dove into all of this, like tried to find all of when this was showing up. But
Looking at old
uh,
photos because people ask what
yeah,
we do all day. Yeah.
that's right.
Does the quarterback have a
Well,
wristband on
listen,
this one? Can we see
as soon as
his
this
left
got
wrist? Yeah.
brought up, I was like, I went to my my YouTube TV to see if I still had everything recorded from last year, so I could go back and check. Sean Clifford, I had this year's, was able to like verify all the stuff from this year. Like uh, Ohio State, like was when it started. Like we don't know 100% for certain when Penn State knew about this being an issue,
Hmm.
but like that's right around when it was a
Does
problem,
make
right?
you wonder.
And James said in that answer that you mentioned that the way to fix it is to huddle, right? That's how you
Hmm.
stop people from stealing your signs. And what does having the plays on your wrist do? It
You
allows
huddle.
you to huddle. And Drew mentioned that this morning that like when you go into a huddle, instead of going tempo, going straight to the line of scrimmage, the defense doesn't know your formation right away. They still know your personnel right away because they can see how many tight ends, running backs, receivers are in the huddle, but they don't know your formation. So it's harder to figure out what exactly you're doing if you're not coming out in the specific formation, especially with Penn State, with how much 12 personnel they run. Like they run a lot of stuff out of
Oh
12
yeah.
personnel when it looks like 11 personnel stuff because they split a tight end out wide pretty frequently. It looks like 21 personnel sometimes because they bring tight ends into the backfield. So they do a lot of stuff out of the same personnel grouping. So that can, I think, it's pretty clear that can help in a pretty significant way with preventing like sign stealing. I'll be curious to see how much Penn State huddles this weekend. Like
Yeah.
I don't have I haven't gone
It's a
back and watched
genuine
like
question. Like it
yeah
is
I
a
haven't
genuine question that James Franklin needs to get asked Wednesday night. Which, again, splicing and dicing here, but had it been reversed, we would have talked to Drew first, then we would have asked James Franklin this Tuesday, but here we are.
well yeah.
But no, I do think it's a really interesting point, and it's going to be something to monitor. And yeah, like this is, you start doing it. Well, why? Right. Well, then I guess you can also raise the question, John. Well, if they did it last year, why did they do it last year? Right. Because
Yeah,
James or
there are other
Drew
variables
said,
that play with that.
right. Because Drew said like it kind of helped get the offense on the same page a little bit. But obviously, with a sixth-year quarterback last year, presumably in the same year in the offense for the first time ever for Sean Clifford, right? Like it was a different scenario.
And it
Um,
was right after the Ohio State game last year when it started. That Indiana game was the week after when it started. So I don't know if
yeah.
they felt like they needed to get the offense, on the same page after that. Like
you know,
they
I
played
think.
relatively well offensively against Ohio State outside of like
Well, I
three
think
turnovers.
the trend, yeah, the trend is here. The program hits rock bottom against Ohio State, and
Yeah.
then something changes before or
Well,
after that game.
but they did have the wristband on for Ohio State, so I think
Yeah.
that's interesting too this year. But
Well,
yeah,
and
no,
we
this
know
is
how that worked. So
yeah,
yeah,
but I
so
do
maybe
think this is
that's.
going to impact things.
Mhm.
The sign stealing, the whole situation, because even if Michigan wins, like you're always going to probably rightfully be able to question how much of an unfair advantage did they have,
Mhm.
right? Like, and that's kind of the whole thing with this, right? I've seen a lot of people say like, well, people were stealing signs from Michigan. Let's be clear about something. Everybody's stealing everybody's signs. Everyone in all of college football, they're trying to steal signs, right? Like it just is what it is. They aren't all sending. They all don't have a staffer who allegedly is sending other people to games, buying them tickets, and having them record from the sideline. That is illegal. It's advanced. It's illegal in the
What's the
NCAA.
going rate is what I need to know.
Yeah, I know. Honestly, like I'll go watch some football.
What's
Uh,
what's the
but
going
like
rate?
that is it's just it's not happening like that everywhere, and that is the real issue here. I've seen some of the reporting with like clearly trying to help Michigan out, like with teams X and Y also had Michigan signals decoded, by the time the game started. It's like, sure, maybe that's just from watching the coaches copy, right? And then they try and marry it up with the signals they're seeing. That's much harder to do when you don't have a full visual of the front of the
Yeah.
sideline like you get when you do what they were allegedly doing. So yeah, I
You
think
know what, John? It does raise the question too. We hear so much about expanding the staff sizes and all these analysts in the building, and right. And James Franklin's been one of the many people who says, "Hey, look at Georgia has this many people. We need to have that many people." And I get that, right? Because you're trying to compete in every single area of your program. But it also raises the question, one that we've raised many times, is like, what the hell do half of these people do? And that's where I think as a program, Michigan, you open yourself up to some of these things because again, you are ultimately responsible. If this is your employee, you are responsible, right?
yes.
And so that's
That's why I don't
where.
buy any of the like Harbaugh can say all he wants. He was unaware of these things. Well, then that's negligence because it's your
Mhm,
job to be responsible of what your employees are doing. Like you are their
yeah.
boss. You are what they the mistakes they make are your fault too, right? Like that is part
Yeah.
of it.
Fair or not, if it happens in your building, you're the boss, like yeah, that's on you. So I do
Yes.
think that's gonna be quite the storyline to follow.
We're 20
But
minutes in and we haven't even talked about
I was
football
gonna
yet. That's
say
how
we're yeah,
dominating this storyline
God,
has been
we're
in the entire sport.
the whole sign stealing thing has been occupying a lot of our brain space. But shifting it back to State College a little bit and reprogramming my mind here.
That's right.
We talked to James Franklin Monday. We got the Maryland review, which I don't know if you caught this today, but Maryland got beat so bad that Mike Loxley said they weren't even going
Yes.
to watch the film.
Yes. I mean,
Oof, what an
dude,
admission. Don't say
listen,
that.
that can be the case. Don't tell people that.
Yeah.
Do not
You
do
got it
not
handed
tell
to you so
people.
bad that there was no benefit to watching the film because it was that bad.
Yeah, and it was for them at
Yeah.
every level. But the bright side for Penn State is like this is, and we talked about it a little bit post game, but this is a real opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to build off of it. And I don't know that they have to be like, okay, now the offense has to take the next step, right? If the offense is like
I don't know
60%
how
of
many
what it,
steps they have.
yeah, true.
You know?
If the offense is coming Saturday 60% of what it was against Maryland, they're probably going to win, right? Like that is how far and away the Maryland performance was ahead of what they've done all
Yeah.
season. Like they do not have to be at that level to win this game. If they are, like they'll probably win going away. Um, but I do think this offense needs to be like much closer to that than what it was against
Yeah.
Indiana. And we talked about, by the way, the potential for a turning point of that 57-yard touchdown to Keandre Lambert-Smith being a turning point for the offense. And like the validity of that only increases with a performance like the one against Maryland. And now like they have to do it. They have to show that that wasn't a one-off last week, that it wasn't just unfounded confidence because they were playing a bad defense. Maryland's defense, by the way, is not that bad. Like it's I think 31st last I checked on SP Plus. I haven't checked after the matchup, but before I believe it was 31st. Yeah, it's probably
Trending
worse
down
now.
now.
Yeah, but I do think that like this offense is taking some major steps forward, and I think pretty much all of it has to do with Dante Cephas and Drew Allar. Let's take a short break from the podcast to tell you about the good people at Voodoo Brewing Company in State College. Voodoo, a place that you and I go to frequently, as we've mentioned here time and time again. Both of us love their beer, love the people there. Wes and Josh, both great people behind the bar there, despite Wes being a Steelers fan, Josh being a Bears fan. These are things that you
Yep.
look past when good beer is on the table.
Yeah, it's enough that I can look past it, John. It's been tough. There were
Listen,
some
you're a Packers fan
conversations.
too.
Yeah, so I go in there sometimes in my Bears Still Suck t-shirt just to make sure they know that I'm there for the beer and nothing else. Although sometimes I do get the food too, so I shouldn't say that. And the view is pretty great too. I do enjoy the view. So no, definitely, if you haven't checked out Voodoo Brewery, I think it's definitely one you want to work into your state college rotation. If you're visiting for the game this weekend, be sure to go by and check them out. Get yourself some beer. You can also get beer to go as well. So maybe take it with you tailgating if you so choose.
That's right. And you mentioned the kitchen. They're now serving food there at Voodoo. Every Tuesday, you can join them for pub trivia. Every Thursday, you can join them at bingo. Both of those are at 6 p.m. The cold weather is slowly but surely coming. They will have the fire pits out, which we all very much enjoy. So check them out. Voodoo Brewing Company at 201 Elmwood Street in State College. Back to the pod.
When Drew Allar spoke to us on Tuesday, he said that, yeah, he feels confident. He feels comfortable with Dante Cephas, talking with Cephas after the game and also the middle of last week. Cephas certainly sounds, feels, looks comfortable here. Like it's taken time. And I remember writing that, especially in the offseason, early in the season, saying, hey, it's going to take a few weeks, I think, for this guy to get it going. I didn't think it would take a half a season. I thought maybe a quarter of a season, but regardless, they're here now. The other thing, John, that I wanted to make sure we got on because I thought this was interesting. James Franklin was asked about the running back rotation, right? And essentially, are you gonna give Katron Allen more carries? Because you and I are now aligned on this on the
Yes,
feed Fat Man train, I think is
that's
what we'll
right.
call it.
Some people came around a little later than others.
Some of us are still leading the Noah Kane train, but on the
That's true.
feed fat train, it was James Franklin said that essentially they like what they're doing. They like their plan. They like splitting reps, splitting series. It does not sound like anything is going to change. Now, if something was going to change, he would definitely not tell us at the press conference going into the Michigan game. So I get that. The snap counts will tell the story. But looking at the snap counts after the game, when I got back Sunday looking at them, it was just about a 50-50 split again between the two running backs. So, we see the explosive element with Singleton as the kick returner, right? Like that was a significant moment. James Franklin mentioned it as such against Maryland, but it doesn't sound like, at least reading between the lines, that we're going to see Katron Allen take on, the bulk of those snaps out of the backfield. Is that the right call, John? Would you be feeding Fat Man more?
Yes. I do think it is interesting
How
that
much more?
despite, I mean, I think 80% to 20% would be the distribution that I would go with. But I do think it's interesting that despite that similar snap count, that when Katron
Mhm.
was out there, he was getting the ball more. He had 15 touches compared to 8 for Singleton, uh, 14 carries and a catch for Katron, 8 carries for Singleton, no catches. Uh, and maybe that does point to they're kind of trying to balance out the snap load to keep everyone happy, but in all reality, Katron's the guy because when he's out there, he's touching the ball more frequently, right? Like he's just getting
Yeah.
it more. I'll be curious to see how true that is this week. That's 15 to 8 is roughly like about 67%. It's a little less than that. I think it's like 65%. Math is hard, and I am not
We
here
don't
to
do
do math.
math here.
Yeah, that's right. Uh, but I think that might be what it ends up looking like again against Michigan. If I had to guess, probably like 15 to 7-ish, that range if they end up with around 22 carries. Um, and I get it. Like they have to keep both those guys happy, and Singleton is like a big play back who can break one off at a moment's notice. But to me, right now, Katron's just better, and you got to ride the hot hand, and he's clearly the hot hand.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Like it's to me, it's the momentum piece, it's the hot hand piece. I just pulled them up the snap counts for the receiving core, which this was interesting. We don't know anything new about Harrison Wallace. That's probably something we'll get into on Wednesday. If anything, if we see him at practice, if we don't. Um, but without Harrison Wallace, the receiving core, the final breakdown, Keandre Lambert Smith led the way with 56 snaps, Dante Cephas with 54. And then the next highest receiver after that, which again speaks to 12 personnel, was Malik McClain with 17 snaps. Amari Evans, 14, Liam Clifford, 10, Caden Saunders, 10, and Malik Mega with 2. So
And
again,
some of that
we
is
know who the
swayed
two are
by,
at the end of the
yeah,
game. And yeah,
yeah, some of it's swayed by all the garbage time at the end of the game. You're right, though. We know like the top two, it was Lambert Smith and Wallace, and now it's clearly Lambert Smith and Cephas. And
hmm
I think that is it's much closer to how I thought this would play out at the beginning of the season, right? Like I've
yeah.
been saying that Cephas is going to have a breakout game every week since UMass. I think I started saying that, but hey, it hit. Eventually, it was going to hit. I do think he is
Even a
his
broke
comfort
clock is
level.
right twice a day, John. That was you.
Yeah, yeah. But I do think this one is gonna stick for him, right? Like he's clearly
Mhm.
more comfortable out there. Him and Drew are on the same page. What was really important to me was a lot of the success was on timing routes. And that is something we've seen at times they've been off the mark this year on Illinois, if I remember correctly. That was a pretty big issue. I remember writing about that.
Yes. Yep.
This is, if they're going to run a lot of timing routes, they need guys who that Drew Allar can trust will be there. And it seems that he trusts Lambert Smith and has all season, and now it seems that he can trust Cephas, who is good. Like I think
Yeah.
he is a good receiver. This was always the rub for me, right? Like I thought he was a good receiver who was creating separation, but it just wasn't clicking between him and
You know what I
Aller.
wonder, John? I don't know the answer to this, but will Dante Cephas throw a pass? Is that maybe where this is headed?
No, please, no, I can't.
Sorry, too soon, too
Don't make
soon.
me stop making me watch
I
receivers throw
I
the
know
football. I
that
don't want to watch it.
I know this triggers you when I say it, so I had to
It
say
really
it.
does.
I did ask Drew Allar this week about his thoughts on the Bo Prabula package and kind of how the debut went with that, and he just basically reiterated that that it's going to give the defense one more thing to prepare for, and that there are of course other wrinkles, other variations off of the Bo Prabula package that I'm sure we're going to see at some point this year. I did not. We haven't spoken with Bo Prabula, so I have not had a chance to ask about the people who he embraced after the game and if they were family members or not. I haven't had the chance to ask the very important question of that.
I don't want anything to do with this still.
Yeah, so
This
it might
is a
just be a
you thing.
mystery at this point. Yeah, unclear where that kind of heads. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think this whole thing is you have to build off of it with this offense, right? We've been saying it the entire time. I mean, you have a golden opportunity right here. The fact that your season, you have a chance to save it. You have a chance to throw the playoff into complete chaos. You have a chance to make people actually look at the Big Ten's convoluted tiebreaker scenarios, which I've already looked at. Also, you've gotten help from Iowa. So, like, again, a lot still has
And
to happen.
Illinois.
Yes, a lot still has to happen, but you have to beat Michigan or else none of that matters, right?
Right.
Because can you imagine, John, like, if they beat Michigan, which that's a big, big, big if. I mean, the whole outlook, the whole trajectory changes. It also impacts what James Franklin was asked about this week. Again, like his record in big games. We know the numbers. We've talked about the numbers. We've written about the numbers. I'm pretty sure he knows the numbers, right?
I'd be surprised if he didn't.
Yeah.
He seems to have his pulse on a lot of those things.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's funny. We talked about the Ohio State game, about like how important it was for them to be an elite team, prove they're an elite team, prove they're an elite program, right? And how Ohio State has been like the boogeyman for the full decade of
Halloween was
James's
last
tenure.
week, John. I don't know what that is. That was last week, Halloween.
Fair enough. But they haven't been able to get over the Ohio State hill, right? Like this has been 10 years. They've beaten them once in a decade. That's not as true with Michigan. Michigan is 6-3, I believe, against James, which is still not great. It's funny having these conversations, I guess, for a second time, right? Because it is true though. Like it doesn't, just because we've already talked about
the annual occurrence
like,
here that we're having this rehash. Yeah.
It's like, it feels like going into Ohio State that, okay, they need this one. Otherwise it doesn't, like, none of the other stuff matters. And then they lose it. And then they get to Michigan. It's like, well, if they get this one, like maybe it doesn't matter, right? That they didn't get the first one. And I think that's, I'm doing a column on this week about how, like, this doesn't prove that they're among the elite, I don't think, if they beat Michigan, but it at least proves that they're much closer to Ohio State than maybe we anticipated 2 weeks ago. Because that performance, by the way, it was so clearly their worst offensive one, or second worst maybe, with Indiana. Like that it's like, okay, is this an outlier? Is this really who they are? Right? Like there's a lot to sift through there and try and figure out what it actually means. Beating Michigan makes a good bit of that go away.
See, this has always been my thing the last few years that they've played Michigan. My theory, and we'll see if I'm proven correct or not on Saturday, but my theory has been there are certain teams that you match up better with, like in Ohio State, and there are certain teams that you do not. And Michigan, to me, is that team. And I wrote a column about this last year and said, basically, what if the whole time Penn State's been worried about chasing Ohio State, and the real issue is that they're not built to withstand a powerful, bulldozing type team like Michigan. And that is where I think this whole thing gets interesting to me, because what I asked James Franklin this week was about their mentality in the trenches, right? We hear it every year. Last year, he said going into the game, it was going to be big boy ball. Well, Penn State got completely bowled over in that game. So I asked him again, I said, do you feel like there's been a mentality shift in the trenches? Because, let's recognize, right? Like Penn State's defensive line, the defense as a whole has been tremendous this year, right? Like something has changed. And so much of that talking point all offseason goes back to what I asked him, in Ann Arbor last year, and said, hey, like, why does this keep happening when you guys play Michigan? Like they just ran all over you. Why does it keep happening? And he pointed to the fact that, they needed to be bigger in the trenches. And then once we heard from Manny Diaz in the offseason, he said, well, I don't think it's the size. I think it's more so we need to be more gap accountable. And Manny Diaz likes to use the phrase wearing capes. And that he told these guys all offseason, like, be you. We don't need you to wear too many capes, right? Just do your job, do it well, and you'll be okay. And so for me, Saturday is a chance to see if that holds true, right? Like there's a lot of confidence, a lot of belief in this defense. Like I genuinely get that sense from talking to the players about it. But now do you trust the guy next to you? Because it looks like they have, right? But what does that look like on essentially a season saving, a season defining stage? Do you react the same way? What strides have been made in both trenches, right, since last year? So for me, that's always been the thing, is that I just don't feel like they have matched up particularly well just with kind of the more physical, powerful teams like a Michigan. But then again, John, how do you construct a roster where you do both when you are playing in this division where Ohio State is the more explosive athletes, Michigan's kind of more ground and pound?
Here's the thing. You know who else is really ground and pound and likes to run the ball a lot? Utah. They smoked them in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things where I think probably this year less than any other, it's not as true, right? Like the stylistic stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because this is a Penn State team that is more a little more Iowa than Ohio State. Yeah, the offense. Yeah.
Right. Like, and the other thing is, like, Ohio State has its identity and has for years. It's a spread offense. They're going to try and beat you with athletes on the outside, and they're going to run it up the middle with elite running backs and break off big plays.
And they're going to have elite receivers.
Yeah, Michigan's going to be able to grind the ball down and eventually break off big plays in the running game because they're just bullying you up front and you don't really have an answer. Penn State felt like it was just trying to match Ohio State's identity. And, the discussion about like, okay, how are you matching up with these teams? The problem with that is you're not dictating how the game is being played in that scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are allowing the opponent to dictate how you play. And that's not how the best teams in college football win, right? Like Georgia isn't like, how do we match up with Alabama? They're like, no, we're going to build an elite defense. We're just going to shut you down. It's not going to matter, right? Ohio State doesn't look at Penn State and Michigan and go like, okay, we got to get these big, strong guys to deal with them. There's like, all right, we're faster than you. We'll beat you that way, right? Like those teams have their distinct identities. And it's felt like Penn State has kind of been searching for that in the James Franklin era, right? Like what exactly that was.
Bit of an identity crisis, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Even the 16 to 18 teams, right? Like it didn't feel like, yes, they relied on explosive plays, but they didn't necessarily have a specific way of getting it, right? They had great weapons at receiver who could go get the ball, same with tight ends, but it felt like a schematic advantage rather than an identity advantage, right? And I think that's kind of important to know who you are as a football team. And this year's team, more than any, especially defensively, feels like it has an identity, right? They're gonna wreak havoc in the backfield on quarterbacks and running backs. They're going to try and turn the ball over, and they're going to bring immediate pressure. And if they don't get it, the corners and safeties are good enough that it's not going to matter, right? Like they are an all around like high level elite defense. The offense, the identity is there, but it's not as prevalent.
It's
Right?
not
Like you don't use
explosive.
right. Like
It's more of it's a little more Iowa than we thought, right? Like
but even
they're
then,
gonna
like
try to
they
grind you out, and then
couldn't do it
Franklin always
against
says
Ohio
it's
State though.
no, and he's like, our identity is going to be complementary football. And to me, that's saying, hey, you know that your defense and your special teams kind of have to shoulder the load here, right? Because whether or not last week against Maryland was an outlier, or if that's what you're going to be more of, we don't know. But I do think, yeah, there is something to that, to the identity piece, and the fact that here we are in November, still talking about what's their identity. Like to me, that's kind
Yeah.
of, I think, encapsulates where this whole thing is with the offense. But you mentioned the defense and how they're going to wreak havoc. We still are not sure on Chop Robinson or Amin Vanover if they'll go this week. Again, we're recording this Tuesday night. Franklin said they're hopeful that both will play. Well,
Yes.
I'm also hopeful that I'll win the lottery, but here we are.
I remain hopeful that I'll win the lottery, by the way,
Oh
into
yeah.
perpetuity.
But if you win, John, we would still keep doing this as a passion
Yes, of
project.
course.
Yeah.
I I'm not kidding. Like I've said this to a lot of people don't believe me. Like this job is fun. I would do this forever, right? Like this writing all of it. Like it's a lot of fun. But yeah, no, this is they kind of need Chop this week. They have elite defensive ends, but his presence only makes those other guys better. Especially in the Prowler package. It was funny. They lined up Dom DeLuca at the spot where they would put Chop. And I was like, this wasn't the first guy I thought of that they would put there, but it worked, right? Like DeLuca was really good last week, to his credit. Someone
Really
we actually
good,
didn't talk about probably enough post game, like how good he was in that game, in part because the whole defense was that good. But no, they need Chop out there. They need Amid Vanover to be able to rotate in and give those guys some rest when they need it. But this matchup to me, like, it still all comes like I don't think Michigan's going to score more than like at most like 24, right? So to me, this and we'll get into our.
I was
Actual
going to say, I
predictions
just
later.
glanced down at my prediction just to see where we're. Yeah.
That is not an indication of what I've predicted, by the way. But I do think like Penn State's defense is going to do what it has to do, and to me that means it comes down to the offense. And do you think that there's going to be carryover from Maryland, or do you think that was more of a one-off?
I think there will be some carryover, but I don't know how significant it will be. Like to me, I think it's gonna be like, sure, they're gonna connect on a few chunk plays, but like we're not gonna see the fireworks that we saw against
No.
Maryland. Like that to me, and that's just a difference in opponents too, right? Like quality level opponents. Michigan is gonna make you work for every yard. And to me, the thing that I'm still not so sure about is the interior of Penn State's offensive line. Like to me, that both guards, the center, like that's where I say, I don't know because and I said this after Ohio State, John, after I picked them to win, I said, until proven otherwise, like I am not going to go all in on this offense. Just because you can't, like you got to win me over and convince me that this is going to be a better team, an improved team. Like James Franklin said, he will not apologize for winning. He also doesn't want people taking winning for granted. I will say, John, I think the fact that they are in Beaver Stadium has a massive lift here. Like, to me,
It helps.
that's big. Like, the crowd is going to be absolutely nuts. Yes, it's a noon kick. We can say whatever we want about noon and whether we like it or hate it. Doesn't matter. The game's happening. It's at noon. I just think that crowd, almost like we see with the whiteout, right, where it just somehow elevates this team to another level. I do think that matters for something, but I don't think we're going to see the offensive explosion, the fireworks. Now, you've kind of been on the Dante Cephas train all year with, oh, he's going to get it going. My whole thing has been at some point, Nick Singleton's going to have a really big play that changes things. Well, we're running out of opportunities, so maybe this is that time for him.
Honestly,
to
this is
have
the
that
last
moment.
game where they can really change things because they're going to beat Rutgers and Michigan State. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't watched the games that happen in the coming weeks. They're going to win those 2 games.
Yeah, John is not focused on going 1-0 this week. He is focused on the rest of the season.
No, that's the thing. I'm so focused on 1-0 that I've already declared 2-0 later.
Yeah. No, it's and I'm with you. And I think it's like to me, this is one of those matchups this is why college football is great, right? This is why you have your whole season, months of speculation, all off season. People had this game circled. And you know what? Sure, you would have loved to have been, undefeated when you got here, but you're not. But you have this golden opportunity because as much as we want to complain, and Penn State loves to, about playing in this star-studded Big Ten East division, now you get a chance to kind of pull a Houdini act if you can win on Saturday. So it's a tough schedule. I was looking at the bowl projections, John, as of today, because I think a lot of people, I'm assuming, are probably going to pick Penn State to lose. So a lot of the projections are still the Citrus Bowl. So again, falling out of New Year's 6. So Ole Miss and the Citrus Bowl is kind of where things stand, which I think gives us a kind of a foray into the mindsets of some of the folks nationally who aren't on the ground like we are every single day covering this team. But yeah, I'm just not convinced that much is going to significantly change. Although I will say, I found James Franklin's comments interesting when he said, like they did against the Iowa game, they've got to be patient as an offense. To me, that was like a direct line to Mike Yurcich of like, hello, be patient out there, because it's going to be tempting, I'm sure. But you do have a quarterback who's more confident. You have a receiving core that's more confident. But the interior of that offensive line to me is a little concerning.
Yeah, and you mentioned the New Year's Six Bowl. Like I said this to you after last week's rankings came out. They were number 11. I don't think they're going to make it if they don't beat Michigan. Like to be number 11 and to really only have wins left against Maryland, Rutgers, and Michigan State at the time, like it wasn't exactly promising given the teams ahead of you. But if they go win this game, then the playoff is on the table, and then everything is, turned chaotic, because then all you really need to make the playoff is Michigan to beat Ohio State, and they've done that.
Yeah.
Like,
and the game is in Michigan, right? That's the other part. Yeah.
And it's in Michigan, and they're probably better this year. I don't know. It's going to get chaotic. This game though is, to me, going to come down to whichever offense finally gets one. Right, like whoever can break a big play, and I don't think Penn State's positioned to do that just yet. I think, if you tell me that Cephas and Lambert Smith each have like 70 plus yards, I'll tell you that Penn State probably is winning this game, right? Because that means the offense is clicking on some level. If you tell me that nobody on Penn State has more than 40 receiving yards, then I'm guessing Penn State probably isn't breaking double digits or more than a touchdown. I just think like there are a lot of indicators on this offense that we'll know, I'm guessing pretty early on Saturday, how realistic a win is, because that Ohio State game was close throughout, but I don't know about you.
One possession, as James Franklin likes to remind us, one possession. It never felt like they were in it.
Yeah, except when for the Curtis Jacobs called back play. Like when that happened,
that's the only moment.
Okay, like here we go, and then it gets called back.
And that is where my thing with this game is Penn State is going to need a touchdown either on defense or special teams. Like I think that is, you talk about what's their formula for winning, and sure, the offense has to play better. But to me, like you're going to need a touchdown from one of those two units. And the crazy thing is like that could happen, right? Like we've seen it with Daquan
They're good
Hardy.
at that.
We've seen it with Nick Singleton. Like, like to me, that is with his defense. Like to me, that is the thing where I say, they're going to need that. but also it's probably not the craziest thing to say because I could actually see that happening. Because you're right, that moment with Curtis Jacobs was the only moment where I felt like the tide was going to change for Penn State, and then
And it
once
felt
that
like it
got
was
called
shifting
back,
drastically. Not to
yes.
bring people down with this bad
You know what,
bad
John?
memory, but
Why don't you just open up that wound and I'll go grab the salt? Because
that's
man,
fine.
it sounds like that's what
Listen,
you're doing.
listen, as everyone who listens to us frequently knows, I'm a Philly sports fan. I know all about the salt in the wound. It's my
Hmm.
whole livelihood at this
You know,
point.
pain. Yeah,
That's
must
right.
be really hard watching a football team that good right now. Really hard.
Listen, go Birds. That's all I got for you. All right, let's go on the record here. I'm
Hmm.
gonna make you go first because
Yeah, because
last
you
week
went
I
first
went
last week.
first. I won't
I've
show
got
it, but
mine. It's written
it
down.
is written down on this post-it note in front of me, what I predicted. So you go first. What do you got?
My prediction for Saturday is Michigan 21, Penn State 13. I said all along Penn State has to win me back with this offense. It was a strong showing against Maryland, but this is a different team. This is an elite team. Again, it's going to be, unless they get that defensive or special teams touchdown, it's going to be tough. So I'm going Michigan 21, Penn State 13.
I went even lower on the total. I actually haven't
Mm,
checked the line on this game
yeah.
recently. Again, thrown off by the whole week schedule. I have Penn State losing this one 13-10.
Okay.
I don't think either of these offenses are going to be able to move the ball that well. I think it's probably going to be a knockdown, drag out type fight. I don't think either. I think Michigan probably
Yeah.
hits on one big play and that flips it, right? Like I could easily see this being a game Penn State leads 10-7 late and Michigan scores a touchdown, right? In on the last play, whatever. Like I can see these kind of things happening and it being, unfortunately for Penn State fans, pretty heartbreaking. But I do think it is going to be really close. I think it's going to be really tense. I think it's going to be a really good football game and a lot of fun to watch from the objective perspective.
Oh yeah, we're gonna be rewarded with, I think, an excellent game. But I do think, again, looks like kind of perfect November football weather from what I've glanced at so far. On top of that, so I don't think you have to worry about like the elements or anything crazy like that. But yeah, this is going to be a slugfest. Like this is, if you're expecting a bunch of fireworks, this is not the game for you, but it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be absolutely insanely stressful for Penn State fans. But regardless of how it goes, we will be here after the game eventually. We will
Yes,
chat with you guys. Make sure you have the Nittany Dispatch at least by Sunday morning at the latest. That is the good thing about the noon kick, John. It gives us a
that's
little more
right.
time to get our work done, get our writing done. You can find me at the Athletic. You can find John at the Center Daily Times, CDT. Anything else we didn't hit on, John, from our Tuesday edition?
No, I think that's everything. Like you said, we'll have an episode up pretty quickly, so you can either you know talk through the pain or enjoy the
Mhm.
joy after the game is over. But like I said, I'm looking forward to Saturday. It is going to be I think a high level football game between two good teams, which hard to complain about those kind of things, even with the offenses maybe not being as explosive as you'd want. Of course, follow Audrey on Twitter at OddSnyder4. Follow me at John Sauber. That'll do it for this episode of the Nittany Dispatch. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.